And hopefully it's changed now. But when I was young, I was growing up in the 1980s. I went to a school. There were 2 BBC micro computers in the school, and only the boys were allowed to play on them. The girls weren't allowed to touch them. So, well, if there's an opportunity, the lesson of my life is if there's an opportunity that comes in front of you, like the essay competition, take it.
Hello and welcome back here at FeelingTERrific. Today I have another very special guest with me, someone who will inspire us today because we will shine light on a interesting topic. I don't want to take it away. Michelle, thank you very much for your time. I'm really happy that you are here today with me, that you are open to have this conversation. Over to you for a quick intro. Who are you?
Thank you, and it's great to be here. I'm Dr. Michelle Supper. I have a PhD in Astrophysics, but I have had 13 years experience now as an enterprise and system architect, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, I think the first one and the most obvious one, so you, based on your study, your background, right? How come that you are working in the software industry?
It's a strange and convoluted tale. So it starts off in 1995. I entered a competition. As a child, I hated writing essays, but there was an essay competition, and for some reason I entered it. And it was to write, they called it a thesis. It was just a long essay about how you thought the internet was going to change the world in various ways. So I wrote mine about how we could try and make world peace using the internet. This is back in 1995 when most people didn't even have access to the internet. I wrote this essay and it won. So the prize was to go and represent the United Kingdom at the Global Information Infrastructure Junior Summit in Tokyo. And I went there along with 40 other kids from around the world. And we had a wonderful time and discussed what the future of the internet was going to be. And that event was chaired by Mr. Yunkyo Fujieda, who I stayed in touch with. And many years later, when I was writing up my PhD thesis, he got in touch and said, "I'm in London, come see me." So I did, and he took me to the Open Group conference, which was in London, and he introduced me to lots of enterprise architects and told me what enterprise architecture was, and said, "You're going to be an enterprise architect." And I said, "No, Jack." And he said, "No." He said, "No, he said, I've got a job. I'm going to be a radar design engineer." And he said, No, you're going to be an architect. So no, I went to start my job as a radar design engineer. And 6 months into that project, I realized that while I was making progress on my radar design, the rest of the project has stalled. So I went to the project manager and said, "We need to get an architect to look at this. We need an enterprise architect." And she said, "We don't have one. You do it." So with no training, I became the enterprise architect for a £125 million defence system. And I taught myself MODAF, and I mapped the whole project out and unstuck the project so that it was able to be delivered. And I haven't looked back. So, Jack was right. And if you get told what to do by your Japanese mentor, then absolutely agree every time.
It sounds like a really interesting journey. But it also sounds like it's kind of a destiny, right? So as you mentioned, you didn't think about I would end up there doing that, and then you are
I'd
here
never
today.
heard of it. Before Jack took me to the conference, I'd never heard of the discipline of enterprise architecture. And I was working at that point. I won't name the company, but I was working in a building with 3,000 engineers inside it. And we didn't have an enterprise architect or a system architect for that matter. So, it shows, the discipline has come a long way. But unless you know about it, then, how are you going to look for it?
So please enlighten us. What is actually a business architect doing? Because I think, and I assume, and I'm pretty sure that not everybody knows what this is about. And maybe let's try it from this perspective, or think about it that I am you before talking to the Japanese mentor.
Okay, so there are different kinds of architects. First of all, let's get off the table. It's not designing buildings. We're not proper building design, make an extension, build a skyscraper type architects. That's not what we do. But there are different kinds of architects. There are enterprise architects, which cover the whole business at a high level. So low level detail. Less detail, let's say high level. So business strategy, how the organization is lined up. So what systems are in use for which people, who uses what. So typically you would think about an enterprise as having layers. So you'd have your strategy, motivation, business, data applications, technology. And you can think about each of those different layers separately and see how they are structured and how they're laid out and what's the best arrangement for the things in those layers to be. But you can also look in between those layers and see how those layers align with each other. And when you have a well-aligned business, then everything runs beautifully. If everything's working perfectly, you don't notice that there are systems and processes in place because things just flow. They just happen. When stuff isn't working, that's when you really notice it. You run up against a system that's broken or a process that takes forever and communication lines that fail. That's signs of a bad architecture. That's signs of a bad design. And so if everything's going right, if your architect is excellent, then your business will be running on rails. It'll be fantastic. And if it isn't, then you need an enterprise architect to step in. But there are different kinds of architects. So in addition to an enterprise architect, which covers all the layers, you might have specialist architects within the layers or in subsections of it. So you might have a business architect will look specifically at the business capabilities. So that's the people, the process, the technology, but specifically how the business is aligned. Or you might have, let's say, a security architect who's looking at how your organization is secure against cybersecurity threats or physical threats and looking, just precisely in that domain. No architect is better than any other. So a lot of people make this, this misunderstanding and they think, an enterprise architect must be special because enterprise like Starship Enterprise and they think it's big. It's not. It's, a really good data architect is worth their weight in gold and has the same level. There's no difference in status between the different architects. Everyone has their own role and their own level of importance within an organization. And if you have, if you need the services of an architect within your business, don't hesitate. Get them involved, because it's better to get it right first time with architecture and plan things out strategically and work out how things should be, instead of just hoping that things will just land in the right place through random efforts.
Yeah. No, thank you for for describing it. I'm wondering, are there a lot of prejudices against the different types of being an architect?
Prejudices against being an architect. Well, there can be misunderstandings. There is no clean definition of what an enterprise architect is or what an architect is. And so sometimes there are people who, let's say, have gone through their career and they've got promoted and suddenly they've got to a point where there are no more titles and then they get given the title architect because it sounds important. That can be problematic because you find people then in a situation where they are put in a place where they're not able or qualified or have the correct skills in architecture to be able to make the decisions that an architect needs to make. So that can be difficult. And that sometimes causes prejudice against architects when they have that kind of engagement. So let's say you're working with someone who's called an architect who can't make a decision, who doesn't know how to arrange something, or doesn't know how to align a system. That can be a problem and it can give other architects a bad name as a result. So that can be an issue. But a good architect is someone who has all the skills of a management consultant. They'll be able to go in, they'll be customer friend, they'll be a trusted advisor. They're someone who can go in and solve any problem with logic and with a formal approach. And, as long as they keep that objectivity, then it's okay. What you don't want is an architect who comes in and just tells you what to do, because that's, that'll get people's backs up. It's about working with the customer and coordinating the ideas, helping people to think through the problems, helping them to get to the right answer as efficiently and as best as possible. Yeah.
So how is based on how you just described the architecture, right? So how is your job at ServiceNow looking like? How's it looking like?
So my job role recently changed. So I've been at ServiceNow for 3.5 years. Yes, time is flying. Nearly 4 years, my goodness. So started off as senior advisory executive architect, so working with customers, helping to solve very tricky problems, helping them to understand what changes they wanted to make, and then putting together a solution based on the Now platform and showing them how that would then integrate into their systems. So started off doing that, and then realized that within the team, we had quite a small team at that point. We had about 4 or 5 people. We realized that within the team, everybody had their own approach to doing this task. And so, while everyone was very skilled, everyone had different experiences, different techniques that they would use with customers. There wasn't an approach that we could use which was reproducible. And so, continuous improvement was difficult. Comparing projects was difficult, and reusing material from one project to the next was virtually impossible because we all had different approaches that we would use. Also, it was very difficult to scale and bring people in because, we had this very, very bespoke team of high power consultants, and it was very difficult to sort of bring in another one into that mix. So I've got a fair amount of experience in writing standards. And so my first instinct was to produce a method. So I wrote an enterprise architecture methodology based on the standards that I know. So it's based on TOGAF, it's based on business architecture techniques that I've used in different places. It's based on a few techniques which I've evolved on my own. But together, these things come together in something which I call guided architecture. And so I started to teach this method with my colleague Dan Warfield as well from outside. And we started to teach this to all of the platform and enterprise architects within ServiceNow. So I've now taught more than 100 people this method, and we've been able to scale the team massively as a result, and everyone's been taught this. So we've now got one baseline of skills. Everyone still has their own skill sets, which they can still bring in, but they all have a baseline that we can use and compare. And which is wonderful. So my job role has now changed to EMEA Enterprise Architecture Advisor. So I still work with customers, but most of my role now is in thought leadership, it's in training, it's in writing white papers, it's helping other people within the enterprise and platform architecture teams to do their job using guided architecture and reviewing their work and making sure that it's all embedded.
Yeah. How or what do you think about empowerment in this context?
Empowerment of whom? The customer or the enterprise architect?
The last one. So I'm thinking about, obviously, when you teach someone something, right? Mm-hmm. Most of the time, it also has to do something with change management from old habits, old thoughts, old beliefs, right? Mm-hmm. So what do you think about the importance of empowerment in terms of that you, for example, empower people to become a better version in their professional context?
Yeah. So in terms of empowering people, it's skills training for enterprise architects and knowing a path, a career path, development path. It's virtually impossible. Every enterprise architect I know has got a different approach and a different way to get into being an enterprise architect. People sometimes ask me, how do I become an EA? It's like, I fell into it by accident. So
good advice.
But there's no set path, and so people come at it from all different angles. And so what this does is gives us a way of communicating, gives us a common vocabulary, and that means that we can start to talk to each other within the team on a level. So people now know what certain things mean. Yes, it's like, right, if I say business capability, I hope that my colleagues know I'm talking about business capability as people, process, and technology together. So there's a set understanding. There are set ways that we have of listening to the customer and planning out and working out what pain points the customer is facing, and then connecting all those together. So we look at the strategy of the organization. We look at the drivers that the organization has to want to change. We look at ways of grouping those together and then working out what goals they want to achieve. And then from there, we can say, well, hey, look, we've got the Now platform. So how are we going to use the Now platform to fix your goals? And so now we have a set way where we can map together the strategy, the drivers, the goals, and the solution. So we have a way in which we can provide traceability back to the customer. It gives all of the team members a reproducible method which they can use and improve. And it's really efficient. So it's still based in architecture. It's still got that foundational set of skills, but it means that we're not wasting time. It means that we can spend time with our customers more wisely. We get to ask the questions that we need to ask. We get to work with our customers and gain their trust and produce tailored solutions that actually fit their needs. in a very easy way. So it's very empowering in that sense, but it also empowers the customer. So the reason I called it guided architecture is not so much to guide my colleagues, it's to guide the customer. So what we often find is that the customer, when they approach us, will have usually quite sometimes there are a few exceptions, but sometimes, most of the time, we have people who have relatively low maturity enterprise architecture capabilities within their own organization. As you expect, if you're working with an organization that isn't using a software platform, they've still got quite an old-fashioned type of a landscape where you have very siloed applications. Obviously, they haven't been thinking about how those applications are going to be connected, how they're going to share data. It's not so. If you're using enterprise architecture, it's not a situation you'll be in. So we can look at the customer's needs and understand, and also help them to understand the enterprise architecture concepts that we're talking about, which then helps to mature the customer's enterprise architecture capability at the same time. That means now that the enterprise architect at the customer side has more confidence to go and discuss the Now platform and discuss what the future is going to look like with their colleagues and with their delivery partners. And when they are able to ask the right questions, the customer is more likely to get a better and more successful outcome. So we're helping them to step up and really understand how to use the platform in their environment, how to change their way of thinking.
Yeah, this is very powerful. And it shows just the importance of empowerment in this context. So thank you for that. Maybe from a different perspective, what role does play learning in your role? And thinking about, for example, as you mentioned, you came into enterprise architecture by accident. And you also mentioned that, there might be prejudices against enterprise architects because some people just call themselves architects, but at the end, there needs to be a foundation, right? So in this context, what does mean learning? Yeah, what importance does it play?
So for me, learning never stops. So there are different kinds of learning. So there's kind of learning where you read other people's work and you absorb it and you learn it. And then there's other kinds of learning where you take other people's work and you start to review it and comment on it. And then there's other kinds of learning where you take it a step further and you start to actually write the material that other people learn from. So on my journey, it mirrors the academic journey that you would take, let's say, from school to bachelor's degree to master's degree to PhD. And that's the journey I've been on with enterprise architecture. So I started off just absorbing and listening, working out what is this massive field of that I've never heard of, and just making friends with architects and talking to them and finding out what their experiences were and listening to case studies and seeing how they used this technique to solve the problems that they were facing in various fields. And gone on then to start using those. And the difference between just reading the material and putting it into practice is like chalk and cheese. So, as soon as you start putting something into practice, then you really find out if you know it or not. You learn pretty quick if you don't, because you have to try and make something work. And there's a lot of people, relying on you to make something work. So there's, good peer pressure there. So you learn how to make stuff work. And then you make the transition, if you want, to start writing the material. So I've been involved now with the best part of 13 years with writing enterprise architecture standards. I've helped to contribute now to 8 different architecture standards through the Open Group and help them to write, alongside that, several white papers and guides and 2 books. So yes, I'm now in a position where I can write and I understand enterprise architecture. That doesn't stop me learning. So last week I was learning IT for IT, which I've been helping to write for several years. But when you actually write a standard, you don't write the whole piece. You write a small piece of it, or you contribute to a small area. So this was an opportunity to learn about the whole standard, and then hopefully I'll be able to pass my exams, and then implement that with customers. So the learning never stops. It's a constant journey of increasing knowledge.
Yeah. No, and to be honest, objectively speaking, I would call you an expert, because writing white papers and contributing to standards, this is something. So congrats to that. This is very impressive. And you've been recently spotlighted in Women in Architecture, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yes.
How did it come? Tell us about it.
Like all the best things in life came out of the blue. So Architecture and Governance
magazine.
Like with
the mentor of Japan, right?
If there's an opportunity, the lesson of my life is if there's an opportunity that comes in front of you, like the essay competition. Take it. If there's a competition that comes and you think not many people are going to enter that, especially, and go for it and see what happens. If it's something you want to win, then try. Don't let it just pass you by. So yeah, you have to take the opportunities when they come. But with women in architecture, there are not many women in enterprise architecture. So it's very nice to be spotlighted. And yes, I have worked very hard to gain a reputation within the enterprise architecture world. But that said, there are not many of us. So staying hungry and humble at this point, it's a small pool to choose from. So when I go to an enterprise architecture conference, maybe let's say there's 120 people there. If there are 5 women architects, then that's a lot. It's a side effect, I suppose, of the way that people come into the industry. Typically, people come into enterprise architecture through IT. IT is typically a more male subject than a female one. And so just that bias from very, very early on, from when children are very small, and hopefully it's changed now, but when I was young, I was growing up in the 1980s, I went to a school. There were 2 BBC micro computers in the school, and only the boys were allowed to play on them. The girls weren't allowed to touch them. And when I asked my teacher if I could have a go on the computer, I was pointed to a typewriter, and he said, "Have a go on this. It will help you in your future career." And he wasn't wrong. I do type a lot in the day, but it would have been nice to be able to play on the computer. But as a young child, being told that, it was like computers are for boys, and that was the message. From when I was in high school, there was 120 girls. I went to a girls' school, and I was the only one of my year group who went on to study physics. Going, into physics, there was another 120 people in my year group, and there were maybe 4 of us studying physics at undergraduate level. So, the bias is very much there. There's not many women in these subject areas, and so when you go into IT, or come through IT, the chances of becoming an enterprise architect as a woman are very low. And it's a shame, because women bring the same skills that men do, and others. And so it's nice to be able to go into an organization and to think logically and to fix it. There are strange prejudices within within industry as well. So there was a time, my first job, I was employed and I was in a team of 50 people in the technical directorate, and I was the only woman. And then in another job I was in, I got called in to be an enterprise architect on a major defense program. We're talking, billions of pounds of contract value. And I went in and they had 100 system engineers and programmers that they brought in to code this thing. They had another room full of designers, and I was the only woman in the team. And so I went in on my first day and I used my security pass to get through and everything else. And then people started to ask me where the stationery cupboard was, because they assumed that I was a secretary. But this is what you have to deal with. So yeah, it's lovely to be focused as a woman in architecture, and I wish there were more. If you have, this is a message to anyone out there who's listening, if you have a woman in your team, whether she, if she's logical, if she's got good problem solving skills, if she wants to be an enterprise architect, then please encourage her. Help her to do that. The big difference in my life that turned me from a physicist into an architect was having Jack Fujieda tell me that he believed that I could be an enterprise architect, because he was the first person to say that. So you can do this. I believe in you. And then he took me to a conference and introduced me to those people, which meant that then I had my way in. I understood what the subject was. And that makes all the difference in the world. That's all it takes. That's all women need. We don't need preferential treatment. We don't need a step up or people to lower the boundaries or anything else. We just need the opportunity to take part. And when we do, we'll impress you. That's how it goes.
Yeah, no, really inspiring. And I think this is a very important message. And I think, again, here comes into play empowerment as well. But furthermore, I would say it showcases the importance of sometimes you need to be lucky that you have someone in your life, in whatever relationship that might be, who provides you the opportunity, who is really interested genuinely in you and believes in you, as you mentioned. And this can be life-changing.
Yeah, I pass it on as well. So I through my PhD, I was teaching. So I had more than 300 students as a physicist. I went and did lectures about Einstein and spoke to more than 3,000 people, giving public lectures about Einstein, and now I mentor people as well. So if, take this and use it. Just go and, if you have something, if you have a message that you want to convey to people, if you want to try and educate them, if you want to try and lift them up, spend time with them, mentor them, because that's what people need, is what's missing. They just need to have the door opened and have someone tell them that they can do it, and then they'll surprise you.
We leave it by that. I think leaving this perspective with those thoughts is good. It's not just good, it's great. Maybe from a last question from my side. So what we started in the last episode was, or 2 episodes basically ago, that the guest is asking a question for the next person who's joining. And the question from the previous guest is regarding learning. How do you make sure to not lose focus, for example, in the ServiceNow context, of all the new topics coming up? And you mentioned it already a little bit that learning is an ongoing process, right? Active process. But how do you make sure to also take the time, to find the time, but not being overwhelmed?
I think if you try to learn everything, then you will be overwhelmed. So the way I get around that is to very firmly define my boundaries. There are areas in which I want to specialize, and I will focus on those. And I will make my knowledge of those as good as I can get it. I will, so enterprise architecture, I will go to conferences, I will write the standards, I will work with colleagues, I will read material, and I'll do what I can to deepen my knowledge such that I can understand it enough to teach it to other people, so I can be useful in that area. I'm not going to push myself into all the different possible areas that ServiceNow covers, because if I did that, I wouldn't have time to become an expert in anything. So, trying to gain a complete knowledge of everything is just not possible. But, at that point, there are shortcuts. So understanding who your colleagues are, having a good network of colleagues within the organization. If I have a question about the platform, if I have a question about data, I have people I can ask who have specialized in those areas. And that's more effective, because that way they get to focus on their area of interest, I get to focus on mine, and we both get to benefit from each other's knowledge. So, you wouldn't, if you had a heart problem, you would want to go to a hospital and find a doctor who knew everything, because he wouldn't be an expert in heart conditions. You just have a very shallow knowledge of it. So, if you want to be an expert, choose your area wisely. Choose the area that you're interested in and build a good, close network of colleagues who can support the gaps in your own knowledge, and you can mutually fill the gaps in theirs. And that way, we will have better teams and better knowledge altogether.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. What question do you want to ask for the next guest?
What question do I want to ask the next guest? How would you use your skills to make the world a better place? A lot of us focus our skills on sales and the immediate future. I prefer to think more strategically about skills that we have. So, and also for our customers, strategically for them, rather than giving a point solution that will solve their immediate problem right now. I would prefer if a customer thought about their platform strategy for the next 5-6 years, that gave them enough time to put things into place that will get them to a much better place in the future. So my question for the next person is, given the skills you have, how would you change the world for the better?
This is a good question. I'm curious about the answer, to be honest, of the next person. No, but thank you very much for your time, Michelle. We are at the end of our conversation, but maybe over to you for the last words.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. I hope that I've given you an insight into being an enterprise architect. If anybody wants to join, I've got a forum, the ServiceNow Enterprise Architecture Forum on LinkedIn. You're welcome to join that and join the conversation there. And thank you for having me.
Perfect. And when you will come to Munich, let me know. The coffee is on me.
And same for you if you come to London.
Perfect. Take care.
Thank you.